The other day, I declared myself Westradamus because I can predict the future. And I'll be honest, I didn't see this thing happening. I honestly assumed that Ahsoka on Disney Plus would be relatively successful, like actually pretty damn successful. It felt like there was still an audience for a character like Ahsoka. There's a lot of cameos in this. It felt like the right directors and writers and producers were all associated with the product. And it turns out I was wrong on this one because it hasn't been very successful. And I will admit, it is kind of difficult determining what is successful and not successful on streaming. It's like a new way of looking at television viewership and stuff like that because it's relatively newish and they haven't really worked out all the kinks. But I believe by all measurable statistics, I never thought Ahsoka would do this poorly. It did just as bad as Andor. And I don't believe that's the news that Disney, Lucasfilm, or anybody associated with any of these projects wanted to hear. I've got into the details and I got things to say about this one. I guess I'm Westradamus no more. Sama TV reports that the live plus 5 day viewership for the first episode of Disney Plus Lucasfilm's new series Ahsoka drew 1.2 million households. Disney Plus dropped the first 2 episodes of the Dave Filoni created series on Tuesday, August 22nd. The second episode clocked 956,000 US households. Ahsoka is a live-action sequel series to executive producer Filoni's Lucasfilm animated series The Clone Wars and Rebels, another toon series he created. Ahsoka's first episode ratings are even with the first episode of the Tony Gilroy created Star Wars series Andor, which pulled in 1.2 million households over its live plus 5 day. Andor debuted on Disney Plus on September 21st, 2022. And while Andor is certainly a critical success, and a lot of people, if you talk to them and they're still into Star Wars, they will say Andor is the best thing that's come out of Disney so far that's associated with Star Wars. Andor is not exactly popular. It was actually the least successful Star Wars property on Disney Plus so far. So I don't think this is actually a really good sign, and you can kind of see why Andor didn't really work. Yes, there's one movie that for the most part, I think Star Wars fans can agree, was pretty good from Disney. That would have been Rogue One, which Andor is a sequel of, but all the goodwill that Rogue One kind of created afterwards was absolutely destroyed by the sequel trilogy once you get into The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker and all that stuff. And people that were excited about Rogue One and where this Star Wars universe could go with these spin-off solo movies that weren't part of the trilogy kind of got jaded with the product and really decided not to support Disney Star Wars anymore. You know, the movie Solo being the biggest example. We haven't had another movie since that one that wasn't associated with that sequel trilogy. And in fact, we've only really had the one movie since because people were kind of turned off by what Disney had done with Star Wars. So it kind of makes sense that despite the word of mouth of Andor being really good, that even people that are Star Wars fans like myself, like never really checked it out. But one of the things that George Lucas and Lucasfilm did that was really smart over the decades in between movies and stuff like that was there was always like a new entry point for every generation, whether it was novels that were coming out, comic books that were coming out, video games that were coming out, and animated series that were coming out. And probably the two that I think of when it comes to animated Star Wars series that were really successful are the Clone Wars, which I believe was on Cartoon Network, and then you had Rebels, which is loosely associated with that and has some of the same characters in it. And a lot of people really like Clone Wars, which introduced Ahsoka. And that program started in about 2008, obviously aimed at a younger audience. Those would be, you know, maybe in their mid-20s, early 30s at this point. And then Rebels came out, I believe, in 2014. It was aimed at an even younger audience, and those people would be in like their early 20s at this point. So you have an entire generation of new Star Wars fans that a lot of times their introduction to the characters in the universe would have been Clone Wars or would have been Rebels, and Ahsoka Tano is a really big part of both of those series. Obviously, she's the apprentice of Anakin Skywalker and the Clone Wars. And then when you get to the Rebels, which is kind of leading up to the very beginning of the Rebel Alliance and all that stuff that's happening in A New Hope, Ahsoka plays a really cool part in that too. And I actually watched Rebels, and I don't really watch cartoons. I mean, I watch cartoons because I have 3 little kids, but I watch their cartoons. I don't really watch cartoons for myself, but I watched Rebels and I really liked it. I liked all the Jedi and Sith mythology that were put in there. And one of the really cool story arcs in there, and it's not a major one because Ahsoka's not a starring character in that series. She's more of a supporting character, is this big confrontation that's going to happen between Darth Vader, aka Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano's old master Jedi, and Ahsoka Tano herself, who has given up like the Jedi Order and decided to forge her own path, and it makes her a really interesting character. It was really emotional. I remember getting to that moment in the series of Rebels and really enjoying it. So it feels like Ahsoka probably should have had a wider audience interested in the character and this portion of the universe, because this generation that apparently Disney are really trying to aim all this Star Wars stuff at really grew up on this stuff, and it still failed. I find it absolutely insane that Ahsoka could actually do the same numbers as Andor. You had so many great cameos. You have the entire like crew from Rebels in there, I think, except for Kanan and Ezra, I believe, or maybe they are in it. Me personally, I haven't seen Ahsoka, even though I like the character and I'm interested in this portion of the Star Wars universe because I'm just so checked out on Star Wars just as a whole. After The Last Jedi, like that was kind of the final straw for me, the first and final straw. I never saw Solo. I ended up seeing The Rise of Skywalker just to do a video on the channel, but I watched that like months after it came out on streaming and stuff. I've never seen Andor. I've never seen The Bad Batch or any of this stuff. And I never really thought, like, growing up, there was ever a time in my life where I wouldn't be interested in new Star Wars. And I'm just not. And it appears that it's not just old guys like me that are feeling this way. It's people in their early 20s and early 30s that are supposedly the prime audience that they're changing all this stuff for. But even they don't like the bull crap that Disney are putting out when it comes to Star Wars or really the MCU or anything else. Even this audience that they've been searching out for so long and catering all their entertainment directly to are rejecting it, sadly. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this. This is an even harsher rebuke of Star Wars than The Rise of Skywalker, which sent people walking out of the theater mid-movie because it was so bad. The ratings for Ahsoka Episode 1 Master and Apprentice are down by 50% from the live +5 day of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which dropped on May 27, 2022. With that Jedi Force pulling in 2.4 million households, Ahsoka Episode 1 also was down from the first episode of Season 3 of The Mandalorian by 29%, with that series from Filoni and Jon Favreau earning 1.7 million US households in its live +5 day viewership. The Mandalorian Season 3 began its streaming on March 1st. And I think what we're seeing is this downward trajectory almost across the board when it comes to Star Wars, to where there was a lot of hope and a lot of anticipation that, maybe I don't like this sequel trilogy, but they are bringing back Ewan McGregor. Maybe Obi-Wan is going to be the program for me for a lot of the older Star Wars fans, and it turns out that wasn't the case. It just wasn't a very good program. A lot of people were excited about Book of Boba Fett, which was kind of like another season of The Mandalorian. That was a stinkeroonie. And now that is not only affecting The Mandalorian, but also interest in Ahsoka. But you would expect the Ahsoka audience to be bigger because that character specifically was likely the entry point for a lot of fans that are younger than the people that were yearning for an Obi-Wan series with Ewan McGregor. But it turned out not to be the case. And then you do have Dave Filoni. I believe he's the writer, director, executive producer of Ahsoka. Also, Jon Favreau is the executive producer, I believe, of Ahsoka as well. And as far as people associated with Star Wars that people know their names, like when it comes up to like execs or whatever, like those are probably the two that people trust the most. Like no one trusts Pablo Hidalgo anymore. Everyone kind of hates Kathleen Kennedy. But for the most part, despite a few things that Dave Filoni has said here and there that makes him look like a jackass, people kind of like him because he seems like an all right guy, and he was like the apprentice of George Lucas, or at least that's the way it's been framed. And then Jon Favreau obviously came in with The Mandalorian itself, but before that, he had done the Jungle Book movie. He had also done the first Iron Man movie. I believe he did Iron Man 2. Obviously, he played Happy in the MCU. And a lot of people just really like Jon Favreau because you can tell, yes, he is a director and he's immensely talented, but he's also kind of like you and I. He's kind of a big fan at heart. So whenever you see Jon Favreau's name on something, you assume that it's probably done with good intent and probably has really high quality, and the storytelling is going to be good. But even Jon Favreau can't save Ahsoka from Disney and their terrible reputation at this point. Even Dave Filoni, who's associated with Star Wars, and a lot of old school Star Wars fans have a positive feeling about him, can't save a program from the terrible reputation that Lucasfilm has right now under Kathleen Kennedy of absolutely hating their fans and putting out the most negative portrayals of Star Wars in the history of the world. And this is kind of what you get when you have all these factors kind of moving in on this thing, to where a program that should have pretty wide appeal, that should appeal to multiple different generations of Star Wars fans, can't even beat Andor in streaming, barely beat like Miss Marvel, which was like a kid's show. So I think this has to be considered an enormous L on the part of Kathleen Kennedy, Lucasfilm, Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, Bob Iger, everybody at Disney, because they acquired Lucasfilm to be one of the cornerstones, one of the foundation pieces of Disney as they kind of expanded out. Obviously, you ended up getting Disney Plus. Obviously, the MCU and Lucasfilm are really big tentpoles for Disney Plus, and it feels like it's all collapsing in on itself as people have basically just kind of rejected everything that they've tried to do with these characters and universes. Although that's just my opinion. Other people can look at these circumstances and these numbers and come away with a completely different interpretation of what's happening. Cole Strain, Samba TV's vice president of measurement products, had this to say about it. Disney Plus continues to find success with live-action Star Wars series, with Ahsoka serving as the latest show to draw in more than 1 million households across its first 6 days. Rosario Dawson's portrayal of the Jedi, She's not a Jedi, by the way. That's the interesting thing about Ahsoka. Shows you what Cole Strain knows about Star Wars. Shows that not only are fans eager for more adventures in the Star Wars universe, but that they'll gladly watch shows led by female characters, with women serving as 5 of the 6 main characters. This opens a new chapter in the Star Wars saga. How does having a show with 5 of the 6 leads being female open anything new for Star Wars? That's what Star Wars has been since Disney acquired it. Like, all their movies, for the most part, have been led by women, except for Solo. Like, this isn't anything new for Star Wars, and certainly not Disney Star Wars. But I don't believe that this is an embracing of the product. I believe this is a rejection of the product. There are over 200 million subscribers on Disney Plus, and only 1.2 million of them chose to watch the first episode in the first week. That is absolutely terrible, considering Star Wars is like a worldwide phenomenon. That's one of the great things about Star Wars. When you acquired it, it's like there was no boundaries on the audience. It was literally worldwide. Until you get to China, they had never really heard of it. But otherwise, Star Wars had this rabid fan base that was worldwide, and it's not working. This is another failure, in my opinion. Obviously, Cole Strain, who certainly proved right there that he knows nothing about Star Wars or the character of Ahsoka Tano, has a different point of view on this, but I don't think this should be considered to be anything other than a massive failure and another black eye for Kathleen Kennedy, Dave Filoni, Lucasfilm, Bob Iger, and everybody associated with this. It's yet another failure of Star Wars on Disney Plus, but this will not be the biggest failure. I do predict, if this next show ever comes out, that it will absolutely go under 1 million viewers in that first week. I'm speaking of The Acolyte, which I think will be the biggest piece of garbage ever created in the Star Wars universe. And I saw The Last Jedi. That's how bad I think The Acolyte's going to be. Definitely check this video right here if you haven't seen the details. Aaron and I break it all down. There's also a link in the video description.